you're that frail thin, I think Sean Bradley, I think Manute Bol. There's a whole bunch of people that are very, very skinny. And the one person that I see here that has been the exception to the rule is Kevin Durant. When you're that thin and you're going up against the big boys in the National Basketball Association, it's a different animal.
He's got a perimeter game. He can get to the hole. He has those skills, but he's rail thin. And then that makes me think of Greg Oden, of Sam Bowie, Chet Holmgren, the number 2 overall pick in this past June draft that ain't even playing this year because he's out injured. We've seen big dudes that were relatively skinny. Not that was Greg Oden or Bill Walton or somebody like that. But you look at a guy like Chet Holmgren and how rail thin he was, there is some trepidation.
In the summer of 2023, the entire NBA world was waiting for one thing: Victor Wembanyama's debut. Somehow, he was the main talking point every single day. Most people were obviously eager to see him play. They could not wait to see this 7'4" guy who was compared to Kevin Durant on offense and Rudy Gobert on defense. The hype was insane. Sadly, whenever the hype is insane, it also means that haters are on the way. Sometimes, not even haters, just people who want to be different. They don't want to be excited about Wemby like everyone else. The thing here is, Wemby was such a unique and talented prospect that it was kind of hard to be negative about something. Sure, he was not perfect, but you also could not really point out an aspect of his game that was bad. Therefore, there was only one thing left: his frame. He is too skinny, too thin. He will never be able to dominate in the NBA. How will he do against the likes of Jokic or Embiid? That is what we heard for months, even after Wemby put on a show against Scoot Henderson and the G League Ignite team in late 2022. There was apparently way too much physicality in the NBA for him to handle. If you watch TV or listen to the radio, the only thing you would hear was, yeah, he is good for sure, but he needs to put on more muscle. This is not to say that everyone should have been 100% sold on Wembanyama, or that he had absolutely no flaws. In fact, he has shown us some of his flaws in his rookie season. But the irony is that it has nothing to do with his frame or his lack of muscle. If you actually watched him play before he was in the NBA, you could instantly tell that he did not have a great shot selection and that he was turnovers prone. Like, that was something very blatant. You did not need to watch all of his games. So yes, it was kind of weird to see and hear almost no one talk about this, but go on and on about him being too skinny. Maybe because they had never watched him play? Actually, there is no need to ask a question. Stephen A. Smith answered it himself.
If he were in college in the United States, maybe it would be a bit different. The fact that that isn't the case and we haven't seen much of him, to just go by these highlights, and again, I'm not doubting his skill and I trust you. I'm not doubting it. I haven't seen him play, but I've heard all the things you've articulated.
Let's take a second to fully grasp the insanity of this comment. Stephen A. Smith, one of the most prominent figures in the NBA media world, who was talking about Victor Wembanyama every single week, sometimes every single day, throughout the entirety of the 2022-2023 season and that summer, just blatantly reveals he has never watched him play and bases all of his opinions on the young player on highlights? This is even worse when you consider the fact that the NBA bought the rights to broadcast Wembanyama's game on their app. That means anyone in the US could very easily watch him play if they wanted to. There was no excuse. This is not exclusive to Stephen A. Smith. Most NBA analysts probably never watched a full Wemby game before he got to the league. In that case, they know they can't actually say anything about his game, whether it be positive or negative, because they don't know what to say. They just listen to what others say and repeat the same things. However, criticizing his frame is definitely something you can do without having to watch his games in France. That's the easy and especially lazy part, and it makes sense that most of these guys rely on that. All of this is actually the perfect example of some Americans' egocentrism, not really caring about anything other than American players and American prospects. And honestly, that is fine if you do. You don't have to care. But not caring and then pretending you are an expert on the subject is the real problem. Do you think Stephen A. Smith knows if Victor Wembanyama struggled in the French league due to being skinny? He's obviously got no idea. Even if they knew, most of them would just tell you that being skinny in France is not a problem because it's, well, the French league. It's not a real test as it's a poverty league. The real test, as they call it, would be college basketball, where there's real physicality. If you haven't played college basketball, most American analysts won't truly believe you're ready for the NBA, even if you are quite literally Victor Wembanyama, one of the greatest prospects ever. Do you know what the worst part is? It does not make any sense. The French league is obviously nowhere near close to the NBA, but it's still one of the best leagues in the world. For instance, if you want to compare situations, the Greek Freak was playing in the second division of the Greek league before he got into the NBA. In that case, yes, it would make sense to worry about the competition he's faced. More importantly, Wembanyama was playing against grown men as a teenager and was still dominating the league outrageously. Why would playing against college kids, who, by the way, for the majority of them, will never make it to the league, be more of a challenge than playing against pros who have been playing the sport professionally for years? In his final year in France, Wemby led his team to the finals of the French playoffs against Monaco, one of the best teams in Europe, with 7 former NBA players on their squad. If Wembanyama's frame was not an issue here, why do these people think he was not tested enough? It honestly could, and probably should have been the other way around. If a so-called skinny kid was dominating amongst grown men and veterans, I would not worry in the slightest. We can even go a bit further. All of this talk about him being too thin and trying to undermine what he did overseas is proof of some Americans' feelings about international players. Obviously, it's not as bad as it once was since international players are now dominating the league. But you can tell it does not please some people, who would much rather have American players dominating, like it had always been the case up until now. Therefore, they jump at every opportunity to take a shot at a non-American player. Ask yourself one simple question, which will be very easy to answer. Imagine a player with the same exact frame, body, and skill set as Victor Wembanyama right before he entered the league. Everything is the same except he is American instead of French and has played college basketball instead of playing professionally in France. What do you think the narratives would be? Would they spend half of their time talking about how he's too skinny and how his frame is a big problem? Or would they focus on all the amazing things he is doing? I think we all know the answer. All of this makes even less sense when you take into consideration that Kevin Durant, one of the guys Victor Wembanyama modeled his game after, entered the league as a very skinny player. People criticized him for it too. Look at how it turned out. Obviously, he put on some muscle throughout the years, but not so much. He had a great rookie season despite being really thin. Sure, Wemby is taller, so things are a bit different, but their play styles are relatively similar. It just does not make any sense to be so focused on this one aspect of his game when we have seen players who were not particularly strong dominate the game. Have some people not learned their lessons already? But enough about hypotheticals. At the end of the day, maybe they were right and he would struggle in the league. Maybe they had a point making this such a big deal. It turned out that, no, not at all even. Wemby proved all of them wrong within a few weeks. And make no mistakes, he definitely heard the noise. He knew people were doubting him because of his body and made sure to show them how stupid it was. People said that him being too skinny would make him struggle both offensively and defensively. Actually, every time he would face a stronger center, which is pretty much all starting centers in the league, because none of them are as skinny as Wemby. Except for Chet Holmgren, perhaps. And they were wrong. Really wrong. We all know how well he played throughout his rookie season. And funnily enough, he did struggle, especially early on, with his shot selection and his turnovers. But once again, the Stephen A. Smiths of the world did not know about that. What is interesting, though, is how he did against some of the best bigs in basketball. Because every time someone brought up his frame, the next sentence you were likely to hear was, "How will he guard Embiid and Jokic? Where can we even start?" We often hear stupid stuff from NBA analysts, but this argument might be one of the worst to date. Do they think Wembanyama is going to play the Nuggets and the Sixers every week, and therefore will have to guard them on a weekly basis? Do they think basketball is a one-on-one game? I mean, sure, at some point there will always be a one-on-one matchup with both centers. But most of the time, and especially when it comes to the Joker, it also involves teammates. The point is, you don't just guard the opposing star player alone the whole game. If it was that easy, the Spurs would not have been one of the worst defenses in the NBA last year. Because the gap between Wemby's defense and the rest of the team's defense was huge, and last but not least at all, no one can guard these guys. If your argument for a player who is going to struggle is he cannot guard the 2 best centers in basketball, 2 MVPs, 2 of the most skilled bigs of all time, then let me tell you something. Everyone is going to struggle. And it doesn't even have anything to do with him being skinny. Look at the Greek Freak, Rudy, AD, or Bam. Do they look skinny to you? Not in the slightest. And yet they can't guard Jokic or Embiid. So why would you use that as an argument to undermine Wemby when it quite literally applies to all the players in the NBA? But let's get back to what he actually did on the court against these guys, since, he was going to get bullied by the bigger players. What about a game with 23 points, 15 rebounds, 8 assists, and 9 blocks against the Joker? A near quadruple double against perhaps the best player in the league, and already one of the best centers of all time. And Jokic was listed as 75 pounds heavier than Wemby, nearly 30 kilograms for our fellow Europeans. A massive difference in frame which should have really bothered Wemby, right? But you know what? He did have a bad shooting performance that night. Thankfully, he also had another game against Denver and Nikola where he scored 34 points and grabbed 12 boards, on 44% shooting from the floor and 41% from three. And guess what? The Spurs won this game. Jokic was also limited to only 13 shot attempts. Maybe because he was not able to just bully Wemby like Stephen A. Smith had predicted a few months prior, but scoring on Jokic is not hard according to these guys. So let's take a look at some great defensive centers in our league. What about a 33 points performance against Embiid? Or maybe 30 points, 13 rebounds, and 6 blocks against the Lakers and Anthony Davis himself. 29 points against Rudy and the Wolves, 27 against the Greek Freak. The list goes on, and we are kind of running out of great defensive centers. So maybe, and just maybe, Wemby was not too skinny for the NBA? He had 11 30-point games in his rookie season, and most of them came against really good NBA centers such as the ones we mentioned, or even the likes of Jaren Jackson Jr., a former Defensive Player of the Year, and Miles Turner. His offense was fine. Sure, he was not posting these guys up on the low post on every play, because that's not his game, and that's the whole point. Yes, he is too skinny to do just that, but that doesn't mean he will struggle. He can score his buckets in so many ways that don't involve being physical one-on-one, and that's exactly how he managed to score so much in his rookie season. And the defense, well, you already know it. He really struggled on that end by making all-defensive first team, finishing second in Defensive Player of the Year voting and being the league blocks leader. All that from a skinny player? But he was supposed to struggle with the NBA's insane physicality. Or maybe he was already playing against pros, unlike American prospects, and it helped him greatly to be ready for the NBA despite his body not being ready. Or even crazier, maybe defense does not solely depend on physicality and muscle. Maybe having great defensive instincts, an insane wing size and wingspan along with good placement and IQ is also as important. Okay, so he did prove everyone wrong last year, but what about the future? Because as good as he was with that frame, it's still obvious he needs to put on some muscle. You would often hear people say, well, it's okay if he is skinny, he can just turn into the Greek Freak. First of all, no, not everyone can just have an insane body transformation like the Greek Freak had. Secondly, that is not a good thing. Antetokounmpo is his own player. Wemby is Wemby. Their play style could not be more different, and therefore, their bodies can't be the same if they play two different kinds of games. What makes Wemby so unique is that he has guard-like skills and moves despite being 7'4". He can handle the ball, he's got good shooting form, and he is very quick and agile for his size. Like, most centers who are 7 feet don't even come close to Wemby in terms of quickness and mobility. Despite being 4 inches smaller, Wemby is a freak of nature of his own. Turning into the Greek Freak would greatly reduce all the aspects of his game we just mentioned. Just look at what happened to Antetokounmpo's shot mechanic over the years. He looked like a promising shooter coming into the league, at least for a player his size. Now it is well established that he will never be a great shooter. And that's okay, because that's not his game. But that is Wemby's game. That's not even including injury risk, because adding so much weight and muscle would obviously increase the risks for ankle and foot injuries, especially on awkward falls, which happen almost every game in the NBA. You don't want Wemby to end up like Yao Ming. Victor himself came out last year and said that he did not want to add too much muscle too quickly. His agent even said that adding weight right now would be a huge mistake, and that they are rather focusing on his strength. Every player is unique and every player's body is unique. Not everyone has to be LeBron or the Greek Freak. Why can't Wemby just be Kevin Durant? It's not like Victor will wake up someday and decide he wants to be a post player and spend his games banging players down low. His offensive game does not really require crazy body changes. The defense is probably where gaining some muscle would benefit him, just so he would be able to hold his own better when bigger players back him down in the post. But it's not a necessity. It will happen naturally. It doesn't have to be a drastic change, and it should not be. Thankfully, that is exactly what has been happening, because, let's be honest, After all we have talked about so far, and how he proved all the doubters wrong, we have to acknowledge that yes, he needs to put on some muscle at least. Despite the criticism and the NBA analyst worrying, he has gained a lot of weight and muscle since joining the league. This comparison between the summer of 2023 and summer of 2024 went viral on social media a few weeks ago, as fans noticed that Victor had been working out this summer, looking noticeably more ripped than last year. And if you look at pictures of Wemby from 2022 when he was still playing in France, it is even more clear that he has been putting in work. He has been smart about it though. If you know Wembanyama, he is very meticulous about his career and his body. Kind of like LeBron, and that's a great thing, because this is the biggest reason why LeBron is still one of the best players in the league at 40 years old. If Wemby is putting on muscle at a certain speed, it's a choice that has been approved by his personal team and the Spurs staff as well. It's most likely the right choice. If they truly believed he needed more weight for his rookie season, he probably would have looked a lot different. But guess what? They thought he didn't need that, and they were right. Everything is calculated on his side. Now, his body transformation is slowly taking form. As his agent said, they are focusing on strength. Don't expect him to be huge in a few years. He needs to be strong enough for all the fights he is going to have in the paint. That is for sure. And that is also the biggest change that you may see in his game in the next few years. But don't expect a whole different player, because that may simply never happen. You rarely saw Wemby post up players in his rookie season and back them down all the way to the rack. This might happen more often now. But he won't turn into the Joker all of a sudden, of course. He still needs this to have even more variety in his offensive game, because honestly, it might be the only thing he is lacking right now. The defensive end might be where the biggest changes occur. Right now, he is absolutely elite as a rim protector. But if the Joker or Embiid backs him down, let's be honest, he's not stopping them. He might block them though, but if they always get so close to the basket, this is not a good thing in the long run. It is then smart for Wemby to put on enough muscle where he can hold his own. If he finds the perfect balance between muscle, strength, and agility, mobility, and quickness, Wemby will most likely turn into the best player in the world. Even after all of this, he will most likely always be a relatively skinny player for his insane size. And that's fine, because that's who he is, and that's how he will dominate the NBA for years to come.